Welcome to the Writing Black Joy podcast, where we celebrate the joyful narratives of Black creatives, changing the world one story at a time. I am your host, Sophia Robinson. Here, you'll find conversations with some amazing Black writers and creatives, learn more about their projects and the joy they're bringing into the world, find inspiration for your own creative ventures, and dive deep into the topics that we think and write about. The guests on this podcast are writers of fiction, non-fiction, poetry, music, plays, and so much more, as well as creative guests whose work is all around writing joyful narratives on history's pages. So if you are a writer, a creative, or a lover of the arts, or you simply want to hear some good conversations, keep on listening and welcome to the show. Welcome back to Writing Black Joy. This week, I have with me another dream guest of mine, Shakirah Bourne, who is a fellow Bajan. I recorded with Shakirah some time ago, and we had an amazing conversation that I still think about to this day. I love this conversation with Shakirah and hearing about her evolution as a writer. I think it's easy to want to land on your next thing immediately, but I love how she meandered and how her different experiences fed into one another, and how excited she is to try something new. I found it so encouraging, especially as someone who sometimes feels pressure to stick to one thing when I actually want to write all the things and do all the things. So thanks, Shakirah. Thanks for the permission slip. Here is a bit more about Shakirah. Shakirah Bourne is a Bajan author and filmmaker. She once shot a movie scene in a cave with bats during an earthquake, but she's too scared to watch horror movies. She's a recipient of the Governor General's Award for Excellence in Literary Fiction for her short fiction collection In Time of Need. Her first children's book, Josephine Against the Sea, received starred reviews in Kirkus and Booklist, and also was an SLJ Best Book of 2021, a Black Caucus of the ALA Best Book of 2021, and an Ignyte Award Finalist for the Best Middle Grade Novel. The Caribbean edition, My Fishy Stepmom, published by Blue Banyan Books, was a finalist for the BURT Code Award for Caribbean YA Literature in 2018. She's also the co-editor of YA nonfiction anthology, Allies, Real Talk About Growing Up, Screwing Up and Trying Again, which was a World Book Day selection. Her most recent middle grade horror, Nightmare Island, a tale based on Caribbean folklore, was published by Scholastic in June 2023. I love talking writing with Shakirah, and we dove into some topics including how she started writing at 9 years old when she ran out of books to read, developing her writer voice, her love for writing screen and her early projects, how she shifted to writing children's books and fantasy, starting with My Fishy Stepmom, what she learned about Caribbean folklore, writing for a global audience, particularly using Bajan and Caribbean dialects, the tension a writer may feel writing in a particular dialect, the use of language in different places and how it changes, the importance of a supportive editor, and she even gave some great tips about plotting, characterization, and dialogue that I am planning to use very soon. So, I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. All right, everyone, welcome back. And today I'm fortunate to have with me one of my dream guests. Again, she doesn't know it, but Shakirah, I made a list of dream guests for this show and you were on the list. So that's why
I am honored.
I kept harassing you about it. So I'm so glad that you're able to join me today after a few busy spells. So happy to have you here. I know your time is limited, so we will jump right into it. So normally I start by asking people about their book, but you have a few projects. So I'm going to ask you a general question more about your writing. How did you start writing and everything? And then we will dive into specific books at that stage. But tell us a bit about how you got into writing and specifically the type of writing that you do. I know there's a lot of YA for teens and young people, but I know you also have written other stuff. So how did you get into your writing? How do you decide what you're writing? All of those things.
Oh gosh, no, that answer could take the entire interview. So I'm going to try to shorten it as much as possible. So let's start with how I got into writing. And I honestly cannot remember. Oh, I do remember.
Mm-hmm.
So it was because of reading. So I was a voracious reader when I was younger. I love reading Sweet Valley High, R.L. Stine type books, Nancy Drew, Hardy Boys. And I actually remember running out of books to read because at that time I hadn't joined a library as yet. So we were only using our library in primary school. So I read all of those books. And I remember, I don't know if it was a librarian, but I got the idea that if I didn't have anything to read, I should write something myself. And so I wrote my first book at 9 years old. And I remember it was kind of like Sweet Valley like fan fiction.
Yeah.
Because, you know, there were cheerleaders and one of them had blonde hair and blue eyes and the other one had green eyes and red hair. And there was I should really go and look at that story because it was actually very good.
Sure it was.
You know, it was about revenge. There was a lot of like interpersonal relationships with these cheerleaders. I don't know. It's probably because I also read a lot of Mills and Boone at that time, because remember I told you I ran out of books to read. After that, I found the library, and the library introduced me to Mills and Boone books because I read through the Kid Lit section immediately. Mm-hmm. So I guess my story started taking on some of those.
That sounds dangerous.
Some of those elements. It probably was. So I remember writing that book and showing it to my friends and they enjoyed it. But then I just stopped. I think I just got more books joining the library. And so I just kept reading. And then I remember at secondary school finding out about NIFCA, which is a National Independence Festival of Creative Arts in Barbados. And they do prizes and awards for short stories. So I remember thinking I would love to write a short story. And so I tried. And I submitted my story to NIFCA with a good friend, and she got a medal and I didn't. And I remember being so devastated because I was like, geez, I thought I could write, but obviously I can't because I didn't get a medal. So the next year, she encouraged me to submit stories again. But this time I had no expectations of medals. So I didn't attend the ceremony. And then I remember her calling me and was like, you got 2 medals. You should have come. And I remember feeling so good about that. So it was really thanks to that yearly festival that I started writing consistently and started writing short stories. So then I did a workshop later on with George Lamming. And this is the same friend. She told me about the workshop and told me I should go. And so that was maybe when I was about 20. So I did a workshop with George Lamming, and that was only for 3 weeks. But in those 3 weeks, I really developed what I would call my writer voice. Like he exposed me to different types of books, Caribbean books, more short story writers, trying to remember names, but I have a memory of a goldfish right now. So I cannot quite remember the stories, but I do remember Guy de Maupassant. Right. And in his stories, he uses a lot of irony and twists. And I remember loving that. And so I tried to incorporate that into my stories, try to incorporate writing with a Caribbean dialect, because, he introduced Olive Senior as well. So I think it was only 3 weeks, but in that 3 weeks, I really developed what I consider my author voice for adult literary fiction. So I wrote adult literary short stories. However, I tended to write from the point of view of a child because Oliver Sr. had this story called The Boy Who Loved Ice Cream. And though it was told through a boy's point of view, it was a story about terrible domestic relationships. And I was like, this is unbelievable. I wanted to write like that. So I remember writing Getting Married, which is told from the point of view of 2 children trying to get a slice of wedding cake. And through them trying to get this cake, we see the environment, the abusive environment around them. And that was my first short story to be published by a literary journal. And so from then, I started to just write short stories for a couple of years. I never thought I had enough in me to write a book. Even my short stories were short. You understand? I never wrote anything more than 2,000 words.
Wow.
So the idea of writing a book at that time, which was 60 to 80,000 words. I was like, no, that's not for me. So I remember quitting my job, saying that I was going to become a writer. And that was in 2009. And that was a terrible idea because I had no idea how to make money from writing. I was just like, I'm tired of this job. I like writing stories, so that's what I'm going to do. Big mistake. I had no plan, nothing. And during that time, I experimented with all different types of writing. But one that stuck was screenwriting. And how I got into screenwriting is because I meant to do a workshop Saturday, but I chose the one at 1 p.m. because I was too lazy to wake up for the one at 8 a.m. And I was like, no, I'll go to the one at 1. And it wasn't creative writing, it was screenwriting. And so I just decided to stay since I was there and realized that I loved writing for screen and the formatting and basically, you know, writing a first person present, writing the action and the dialogue. I realized that it really suited my writing style. So I started to write movies, short films. Remember, I'm not a person who can write long things. So I started writing short films. But then I would meet with producers here in Barbados and they would like the story. But when it came to money, talking about money, that's where the conversations would meet a dead end. So what I did is I happened to meet a producer who had a different type of idea. He decided, look, none of us have any money, but we have skills. Yeah. So he formed a company and he had me as writer, him as director, videographer. He got somebody to join who was into marketing, a person who was into editing. Basically, he got a team together who had all the components to make a film, and we formed a company. Yeah. And we decided that we were going to shoot a film in a week. And so I had to write that film, and he wanted feature films because he was like, short films, there are less opportunities. It needs to be a feature film. So that was kind of my first time writing something long, because that would have been like 90 pages and that's 90 minutes for a film. And so it took off, you know. It became a big hit locally. It was supposed to be in the cinemas for 2 weeks. It ended up being there for 2.5 months because people kept coming back to see it. And we did 2 more films together. So for a big chunk of my life, suddenly I was a filmmaker, which was quite funny because I did a 4th film with the international co-production company. And then after I did that, I realized that I really missed writing fiction in terms of stories, because with film, you had to wear many hats. You couldn't just be a writer or just be a director. You had to take on many roles. And while I was good at it, I didn't particularly like producing. I'm an introvert at heart. So I do like sitting by myself, sitting by the beach and reading and writing my books. I don't prefer managing a team of over 100 people, though I can do it. I prefer not to.
But
so I
tell them all the time, writers, like anybody that's happy to sit in a house alone and write. You know, like
honestly, So I love doing the films, but the process of getting there, you know, for the last film, it took about 2 years. I was the writer and director for that one. And, you know, I was like, I need a break. I need to be by myself again. And so I started writing short stories again, delved into some musicals, plays. I just tried everything during that time, but solo ventures.
Yes, solo ventures.
And so I remember in 2017, there was this competition called BURT Award for Caribbean Young Adult Literature. And basically it was, you write a children's book, 20,000 words or more, aimed for children between, I think, 12 and 16 years old. And you got a cash prize, a publishing deal. So it came with a publishing deal, and the BURT organization also bought 2,500 copies of the book. And you talk to anybody, they would say that the average book sells about 3,000 copies in its lifetime. So we have an organization here who is willing to purchase 2,500 books, not just for themselves, but to distribute around the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is amazing. So, but the one snag was I didn't write for children. I in my head, I write for adults. I like big social issues and themes. I like writing cuss words, so I didn't think I could do it. But then I read an interview with Joanne C. Hillhouse, and she had entered the previous year and she had been shortlisted, and she wrote her book in 2 weeks. And at that point in time, I had a project. It got canceled. I had 3 weeks before the deadline. And I was like, well, if Joanne could write her book in 2 weeks, I got 3, so I got 1.5% more time. I mean, like 150% more time.
More time, yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, so I could try to do it. And I had nothing else to do. And so I decided I was going to write this book. And so what I did is I decided I was going to write this book, but like a screenplay, because at that point in time, the only experience I had writing anything that was of a long length was writing screenplays. Mm-hmm. So I plotted it out like I would a movie. All right. And I decided I would write 1 chapter per day, 2,000 words a chapter. I literally planned it out like that.
Numbers.
I have this
many words to write and I got this much time.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm a very goal oriented person. So if I could, and I'm very competitive, even with myself. So if I see that I'm lagging behind, or I'm supposed to have 1,000 words by 5 o'clock and I only got 300, at least I know that I'm behind. And, no, I don't have another hour to sit in front of the TV, or I can't go out with you because I am behind on my target. So for that month, it was 3 weeks. I wrote the first draft of But My Fishy Stepmom. And I wrote it and I submitted it to the competition. So after I submitted it, I was like, you know what, this book, I should say, it was my first time writing fantasy, because all of the stories, all the fiction I would have written was adult, contemporary, set in real life type books. But when I had 3 weeks to write, I had to decide what story I was going to write about. I remember the story that I read, that an English teacher actually read to us, and when I was 12 years old. And it was about this fisherman who became obsessed with a mermaid. And it was a short story. And it stuck in my mind. Remember, I told you I have a very bad memory. But I remembered this story because it ended with the fisherman and the mermaid disappearing, and they were never seen again. And I was very upset because I was like, no, this, I need to know what happened next. Like, how you can tell me that the story's ended?
And you have just summarized the reason that I don't like short stories. I always tell people, if a short story is good, it makes me angry because I want to know what happens next. Well, so I'm like, the best short stories leave me angry. Like, oh. So this is why I always I have one of those real funny relationships with short stories, because I'm just like, I want it to be good, but if it's good, it's going to break my heart.
See, with the short stories are supposed to capture a moment in time, and the good ones, you're right, the good ones may leave you wondering about the rest of the moments.
Exactly.
So for me, I was like, firstly, it was my first time reading about Black mermaids and Caribbean mermaids, which at that point in time I had no idea existed. I knew nothing about folklore, Caribbean folklore. Well, I shouldn't say nothing. I knew about the Heartman because that is something that my parents would have told me. But in terms of folklore from the rest of the region, had no idea. And so I remember thinking, I'm going to write what would happen if that fisherman had a daughter and he fell in love with a mermaid type creature and the daughter had to save him from it. And so I plotted out the story in 3 days. As I said, I treated it like a screenplay. I wrote it, I submitted it. So after I submitted it, I was like, you know what? It was 28,000 words. And I want to say that because that's important. It was 28,000 words. And I was like, well, this is the first thing that I've written that I think would appeal to a mass audience, not just a Caribbean audience, but everyone. So I was like, I wonder if, I had gone to a workshop in Trinidad about literary agents. And so I was like, I wonder if a literary agent would be interested in this.
Okay.
And so I started researching writing for kids after I finished writing the book. Only to find out
in time knowledge. That's what it is.
Only to find out that what I thought was young adult was actually middle grade, because my character was 10 years old. The book was 28,000 words. You know, it was a family focused story. So it was more, in terms of a marketing category, it was young, middle grade, and not really young adult. So I was like, oh, well, I guess I didn't place any competition. And so I started researching agents, because in my head, this competition thing was not going to work because I did not write young adult. I wrote middle grade. And the competition is called the BURT Award for Young Adult Character.
Yeah.
Right. So I started Googling how to get an agent, and I started sending the book to agents in the US in particular. Not sure why. I think it's because maybe the research just led me to US agents, more so than UK agents. So so I started learning more about writing for kids, realizing how to write query letters, how to pitch the book. And about a month after I queried, I got my first response from an agent wanting to see more.
Brilliant.
And so I'm going to shorten this story. About 3 months in to querying, the book was with 7 agents. And then I got a message from BURT saying that I had been shortlisted for the competition.
Yay.
And so that was a shock to me. And also it was a little bit strange, because once you're shortlisted, you get a publishing deal and the distribution. It was just...
this would have been within the Caribbean.
Within the Caribbean.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what to do, because the book was with US agents. So then Robert Sandiford, who is a local Barbadian writer, he spoke to me about rights and territories. And I was like, oh, I had no idea about that. So he was like, you can try to sell the Caribbean rights to a Caribbean publisher and still have the US publisher sell the rights in the US.
Yeah. And you could do this in the UK if you wanted to, I think. Exactly.
So it's like, because they're territories, so you could sell the rights to the book in each territory if you're fortunate. Because I don't know if a rights conversation is a whole other topic, but sometimes writers don't have that option. So I contacted BURT, and they were okay with, once a Caribbean publisher was okay just having Caribbean rights, that they didn't care. And then I had to contact the US agents. And so I told them, well, I got this Caribbean book deal, but I still want to sell. Are you still interested in selling the book in the US? And all of them responded yes. But what that did is that it bumped me to the top of their reading list. So before, maybe, it kind of expedited the process. Okay. So within a month, I had a US agent. I accepted an offer from a US agent, Marietta Zacher. And then I got the praise in Trinidad. So no, suddenly this thing that I did, that I was just trained for 3 weeks, suddenly now I have an agent who is asking me, okay, so what next? And she only represents Kid Lit. Yeah. So she's asking me what's next. Suddenly I have a book deal with a Caribbean publisher. 9 months later, I would have a US book deal. And that editor is also going to wonder what's next. Yeah. And so suddenly I'm a Kid Lit writer.
Yeah. So suddenly you had to decide what was next.
Yes, basically. And so I think that was 2 books ago. I wrote 2 more since then, three more. Because one is coming out next year, Josephine Against the Heartman, which is the sequel, an unplanned sequel to Josephine Against the Sea. Yeah. And I have one more that I haven't actually announced yet, but I will. And so suddenly this is what I am doing for now. Until. So that is... How long did that story take? That was a shortened.
Yeah, that was a shortened version. And I love listening to that story, and I think it's nice because it shows that these trips are not linear. These paths are not linear. You think, like you said in 2009 or 2010, I was like, I'm going to be a writer now. Like, but it's like a winding pathway. And I think is encouraging to people who may go down a road for a period of time and then change and then feel like, like feel that pressure to stick to this one thing. So I definitely loved hearing all of that. Unfortunately, it means I have at least 1 million questions, which I won't ask.
That's fine.
So I'm going to ask as many as I can, and then you just let me know. Then you need to go. So I'm gonna backtrack right to the beginning. You talked about going to a workshop with George Lamming, who, for listeners outside of Barbados, is a extremely renowned Barbadian author, and finding your author voice. Although I feel as if you found it multiple times since then, as you've changed to writing different things. And you talked about writing, like at some point in the story, you distinguish between writing for a Caribbean audience, writing adult literature, writing short stories, and these young adult or children books that you wrote. What did you feel was the difference between writing for the Caribbean audience and writing for a more global audience?
Oh, well, that's a good question. So firstly, I always write for Caribbean people first.
Yes.
So that has not changed. I think the difference with the Fishy Stepmom story, why I thought that maybe that one had a wider appeal, was because of the fantastical element in the story, because there was a lot of magic and creatures. And I did write, like with my short stories, some short stories, I would write the entire story in Barbadian dialect. And that's funny. I've had success with that even internationally. But for this particular story, I felt like I wanted to write it in standard English, but when people spoke, the dialogue would be in dialect, depending on the person. So when I was reading it over, because it had the appeal of the fantasy and it also was mostly written in standard English, I personally felt like if maybe that would have a wider appeal. Because when I was writing for the short fiction, I always felt like if someone would wonder if I don't know how to write in standard English, because they would see the dialect. I always used to wonder if they would get it. Not that I let it stop me from writing it, but I just kind of wondered if some journals, because I was sending out my work to literary journals. So I always used to wonder if some journals or some person who was not familiar with the Caribbean voice would think that I don't know how to write subject and verb agreement. So, I always used to wonder, but I never let it stop me from writing it. And that is a good thing I didn't, because if you look at the books that are coming out now and getting these huge book deals internationally, there are books written in Caribbean dialects.
Yeah.
Right.
The thing I always find about that, I did my degree in the UK. I was back and forth to Barbados, but when I first left Barbados, I had moved to the UK. And at that time, a book was out. I believe the book was called Trainspotting. And
blog post about that.
Really?
Go ahead. I will tell you about my experience afterwards.
Really? And I remember opening this book and feeling like I'm not even sure I understand a word. Like I'm going to embarrass myself if I say what I thought it was. I won't. But it just made me think to myself, especially too, because, I thought people I grew up with, like you growing up in Barbados, but I grew up reading books from Africa, UK, Caribbean, etc. And, you have a book with somebody from London with a Cockney accent or whatever. Like, so sometimes I think to myself that you in your head is one thing to think, okay, well, if I write with a Caribbean or somebody with a Caribbean accent, somebody would wonder about my ability to speak English. But I always laugh because I tell people, I went to school in Barbados and grew up hearing about the Queen's English and came to the UK and discovered that nobody hears
That's so funny.
English except the Queen. I mean, it was hilarious to me. And so it just made me think about, how true is it? And I should say that, there's so many things that impact publishing and different things like that. But I always wonder to myself, how true is it if I wrote a book with a Caribbean dialect, is it going to be any more or less accepted than a book with a Cockney accent or, whatever other.
So I got a story, but before I tell the story, I do want to say, no, let me tell the story first. And then
tell the story first. Yeah.
So basically, Irvin Welch, the author of Trainspotting, was at Booklet Fest in Trinidad. Oh. And I remember going to his session and opening the book as well, just to look at the first page. And to me, I didn't see English. And I was like, what is this? Like, I was stunned. And I was like, this is a book that is a cult classic. Cult classic.
I moved to the UK. It was wildfire.
So I was like,
films.
I was like, what? So I got up and I asked him a question in the Q&A, and I asked him if his publisher had any issue with him writing in dialect, in the Scottish dialect. And I remember he looked at me like I thought I was the biggest fool in the world. And he was like, no. And Isabel, he asked, he was like, no, like, why would a Scottish publisher have an issue with writing a book about Scottish people in Scottish dialect? He didn't even try to extrapolate or anything. He was just like, no, they didn't have a problem. And to me, that was like a kind of reality check for me. And I wrote a whole blog post. It's called How Caribbean People Supposed to Speak in a Story. And I can send you the link to it.
I would love that.
I wrote a whole blog post about that moment, because it was like, if I spent so much time worrying about if people would understand, when I should not have been worrying, because this is a book, is written in the Scottish dialect, is a cult classic. People love it. Like, why am I worrying and making excuses for my own work when I should just, it was like it was like his confidence. Yeah. It was like, why? I was overwhelmed by his confidence. Mm-hmm. And from that moment, that's when I was like, no, I'm going to write a story the way I want to write it. Mm-hmm. So I chose to write this particular book with a mix, but I chose it. I didn't do it because I was afraid that somebody wouldn't understand. That was the voice that came to me when I wanted to write that story. I have some short stories written in standard English. I have some written completely in Bajan dialect, and it really just depends on the voice that comes to me when I sit down to write the story. So I wrote a whole blog post about how I managed to because there is some ways that people write dialect that I find hard to read. Yeah. Right. And so I kind of developed my own way of writing it. So if the word sounds exactly the same, I write it like how it is spelled. If it is a new word, like kind of like gain or wanna, I would write gain or wanna. If I want extra enunciation on ya instead of you, Y-U-H, I would put Y-U-H. And then I would try to make it consistent throughout the story. I just kind of created my own little way, because, we don't have, I think we have the dictionary of Caribbean English, nice. The Allsop dictionary. Yeah. So I just kind of developed my own little way of doing it. So when I wrote Josephine, it was mainly standard English, and Josephine's voice came to me in standard English, but then there was a lot of incorporation of dialect into the speech. Yeah. And so when I was sending it to agents, maybe, at that point in time, it was like take me as I am. If you don't like it, you don't like it. But I wasn't about to change anything. And even when I got the US book deal, they did not touch a word of my dialect.
That was what I was going to ask. How did it work with the editing? Because that's something I've spoken to a few editors over the seasons, and we discuss, and I've done a bit of editing myself. I'm talking about editing work from people from different, not just with dialect, because we were talking about, one of the guest that I had, she was editing a magazine for girls, and she had some entries from like Nigeria and different places where the dialects are different again. And so we talked a bit about editing it, but my thing is it could also just be turns of phrase, you know, like when the very first book I wrote, my editor was in Australia, and there were things that I would say in standard English, but she was like, what does this mean? Like, when I was talking about vacation or versus holiday, just even that language is used. And so I'm curious, how did that work with the editing?
Well, basically, my editor would highlight things that she didn't understand. Like there were some things that I was completely fine changing because it was a US audience. So like it's changing the UK to US spelling, writing things like, I actually can't even remember if pavement is UK and sidewalk is US. I think so.
I've stopped remembering that because I
small like trousers versus pants.
Exactly.
Small little things. I personally didn't have an issue with it because, it's for a US audience. When it came to, there were some words and some phrases that were Barbadian. I had no idea were Barbadian until she highlighted it, or until the copy editors highlighted it and was like, "Do you mean this?" Or and I would evaluate every edit, and I would decide if no is important to the story and important to the representation, that it remains authentic. So no, you cannot change this, or yes, this one thing doesn't matter, so you can change it. And ironically, I did learn some things about our phrases. So I remember there was one, in Barbados, we said oldie goldies for the old time music. I had no idea that the real term was golden oldies.
I didn't know that.
I had no clue.
I swear, I said oldie goldies to somebody literally 2 weeks ago. And sometimes people are too polite to.
Yes, too polite to say anything.
What?
And then, in the book, Josephine gets caught in cowitch, which we know is really itchy plants. And the copy editor said, like, confirmed cowage, COWAGE, which is the official term for the itchy plant. No. It's just that, how we speak, it merged into cow-itch because it's an itchy plant. So cow-itch, and it's around cows, So
what? So it was the real world cow-itch?
Yes, the real word is courage. And so it was like little things like that. I learned about my own culture, which was quite exhilarating. And so I then had the option to, if I want to change it to courage instead of courage, which was a firm no, because no one knows what is courage, I
was about to say, I mean,
right.
Courage, I understand about courage.
And it's so important to have an editor who is supportive because, I could change anything that I wanted. I could leave anything that I wanted. And one of the bigger changes between the two books, between my Fishy Stepmom, which was edited by Jamaican editor Tanya Batson Savage from Blue Banyan Books, and Josephine Against the Sea, was I had a scene in the book where the father is disciplining the little girl. No. He's chasing her around the house and she dives under a pillow. They have this thing because he doesn't actually want to hit her, but so they pretend. So he is beating the pillow and not her, and she is screaming, and it's like understood that he wouldn't touch her, but she has to act like she's being punished.
Yeah.
Right. And so that scene is still in my Fishy Stepmom. So my editor flagged it and she was like, well, this is, corporal punishment, I understand, is something that is part of your culture, right? However, if we do leave it in, it is possible that the book would be flagged by libraries and schools as having abusive scenes. Because even though he doesn't touch her, he's still doing the act of lashing. So she was like, I will support you if you want to leave it in. But I'm just letting you know that if it stays in, then there may be a couple people who are hesitant to let, And so I had to sit and think about if that scene was necessary to the story, if the story needed it to remain authentic. And I decided, you know what? I have it in my Fishy Stepmom in the Caribbean. It's best to just take it out and replace it with him discipline her another way. I think he sent her to her room, or he took away her cricket ball or something like that.
Okay.
So it is little small things like that. But I think I was just happy that I had the choice, you know? It wasn't that my editor came to me and said, oh, this must be removed. You know, I always had the choice, and I always appreciated that.
And that's a very good editor. There are two kind of, I guess, more questions I want to ask before we kind of wrap up. And one is about, you said that you spent a large portion of your life writing for screen and writing screenplays, and obviously you've also written short stories and books and other, you know, anything in between, I guess I would say. Mm-hmm. How do you find? I've always found, I've never written a play, but I, you know, came in drama club, came up performing on stage, and so I've read screenplays. And I always wonder when you're writing them, because obviously a lot of the writing is dialogue, right? The whole thing is built with dialogue, but then it's a matter of building out the filling in the gaps, so to speak. Like, do you still imagine that even though you're writing? I mean,
if I still imagine it, if I'm writing a screenplay,
dialogue, how do you translate? Because I'm assuming in your mind the story is more than just dialogue. How do you, I know you said at one point you were directing, but if you're not directing, is that something that you would work with the director to build into the actual performance, or how does that work? I'm always
so. You mean in terms, so we're focused on the screenwriting element. So it's
on the screenwriting elements.
How I imagine how I imagine the dialogue being portrayed on screen.
Yes.
Like as I'm writing.
As you're writing, yes.
I guess, well, I say this all because I used to teach screenwriting. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I used to tell my students when it came to writing dialogue was to pick 3 words that represent the character, and make sure there are 2 are positive and 1 is negative, or 2 are contradictory in some way. So, and write those 3 words in the header or on top of the computer. And so every single thing that the character does should reflect one of those words at some point in time. So what you may end up, if your character is supposedly sarcastic, blunt, and caring, at least when as you're writing your dialogue, just look at those words and try to make whatever they say and do reflect one of those characteristics. So at the end, what you have is, as you're writing, is kind of like a reminder of what they're supposed to be like. And the worst case scenario is that you might have too much personality, but it's easier to remove personality than add personality, right? Yes. So what you would have is that you will have a character that is well defined. And once that's in the screenplay, then when the actors read it, they kind of know what they're supposed to be, and then they add their own mannerisms to it.
Okay.
So I go into the director role. Like, so for me, when I was directing, yes, they didn't have to say the exact line specifically, especially since it was a Bajan movie. So there's some things that you can't write, like when a person's, well, you could write the stoops, but when like the intonation and the way that a person says something, that would be for the actors to interpret. So sometimes they will put extra pauses. Sometimes they will put a cheese on or a cordy. Sometimes they will add an extra side, and sometimes they would forget what is in the script, but they know the gist of the line that they're supposed to say. And sometimes they would improvise. And if I liked it, they would stay once the essence of the statement is there. Sometimes, sometimes they had to get it right, but other times I would let them do their thing. So I think. Once you have
having those 3 words is that they will still be staying true to the character.
Exactly. So because it's such a big body of work, your writing is 90 to 100 pages. It's easy to get lost, or for the voices to like start sounding like you, the author, or merging into the same type of character. So as you're writing, if you have those 3 words, it's kind of like a reminder. And then when you revise, you're looking at what the person is saying. So I would take out the dialogue only and put it in a document, and I will read each line of dialogue, and then it's like, okay, do I need to make this more sarcastic? Do I need to make this more blood? Okay, maybe they're too sarcastic in this moment. Let me make it more caring. And so, you have those words. And so it kind of helps you to stay on track. So I hope that answers your question. There was something else.
It answered about 4 different questions I had. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So
I'm so sorry.
No. So I think that's what I used to tell my students to do. And it's important that I also told them, because it was film, that the dialogue is a tool. And if a person turns off the sound on your film, they should still be able to know what is going on in the story. So dialogue is last. You think about dialogue last. So you write the actions because it's a visual medium. So you write visually first, and then you use dialogue to add to the story. And so I would give them exercises like to tell a story without dialogue, or they would watch films like without dialogue, like that Shaun the Sheep, like those type of movies that don't have any dialogue whatsoever, yet you would know from what the character is doing and their facial expressions how they feel. And so even though I did talk to them about how to write dialogue, it was important that they know that dialogue was the last thing, the last tool for film.
Yeah. And I guess that's why I asked, because I feel like so much of a story, like there's so many parts of a story that are just the subtext, that are just the how people interact, and so much of communication is not verbal. But I guess when I've seen screenplays, it's been 90% dialogue. So I guess wondered, like, how do you almost like put meat on the bones, like how do you that definitely answered the question. The other question can relate to any of the writing that you've done. You talked about mapping out My Fishy Stepmom. How do you map? Do you kind of like, I remember I used to be in a book club back in Barbados, and once we had Dr. Karen Laurie came. We had read one of her books, and then she came to we were part.
I love Karen.
Yeah, and she talks about these Excel spreadsheets, okay? Like the Excel spreadsheets. Because of course, when you're writing fantasy, it's not just the characters, it's a world building too.
World building, yeah.
I know your fantasy may still be set in Barbados in a way. The world is there, but it's a fantasy, so it's a world building thing. So she talked about the world building and the Excel spreadsheet, all the locations and all of that. And I was just like, whoa. I feel like I would be so tired after I did all that work.
Which is why it takes so long to write certain kinds of books.
Of course. So do you find you have to do a lot of, are you that sort of plotter, like very much mapping things out, or do you more like do it as you go along? Like how do you?
No, I can't. I have to plot. Because remember I told you I was not a person that ever thought, to me, writing 80,000 words, 60,000 words, that's a lot. And it's intimidating for me. It's easier for me to see it in 500 word chunks. Right. So I have to plan out. I plan. I try to know as much about the story as possible before I start writing. So I spend a lot of time thinking about the story before I even start plotting. So I would like send myself like emails with notes about the characters or plot or something funny that I think should happen. And I would do that it really depends on the book. There's a book that I've been doing that with for about 10 years now. So, but I do that all the time. Anytime I see something or something's interesting or something, I would say potential character, potential moment, potential this. And so then when I'm ready to write, to plot, I will go into my inbox, which I have a brainstorm inbox, and I would search. So for example, if I was writing a horror story, I would put horror story and search for all the emails that relate to horror. And I would just read them all and pull out what I think will be good for the particular story. In terms of plotting, I use a triad structure by Sid Field, and with a mixture of Save the Cat. But the important thing about how I plot is that I plot really to preempt any potential writer's block. Because for me, writer's block happens when you don't know what is going to happen in the story.
Like you don't know what that person would do next.
Exactly.
What's going to happen
So as I'm writing, I may veer away from that plot line. In fact, it happens all the time. However, it's kind of like a safety reassurance that even if I get lost or going all around, I know where I'm supposed to be at any given point. Mm-hmm. So I do chapter outlines on what's supposed to happen in a chapter. Even though it changes, I just like having it there because it's kind of like my comfort. It's kind of like my teddy bear.
I know, right? It's one of those, one of those things is like you better have it and don't need it than need it.
Exactly. And so because my stories are mainly set in the real world, except for Nightmare Island, which was another story. Well, it is set in the real world, but not in an actual place. Mm-hmm. But any world building elements, any setting elements, all of that goes into my outline. And now I use Scrivener. I find using Scrivener is best because I have a million tabs open, all these different pictures, all these different sources. So with Scrivener, I like being able to compare two different documents at the same time, mm-hmm. and as I write. So so I use a mixture of Save the Cat and the triad structure. I am not like rigid, so something doesn't have to happen at 25% in. However, around the 25% mark, I'm aware that something needs to happen soon. If not, the pacing may be a little bit off balance.
Yeah.
So I have the outline before I start writing, and I am not a person who could just sit down and. The scariest thing to me is a blank page and a cursor blinking.
Wow.
I need to know what is going to happen, and I need to have a plan. If I veer away from that plan, completely fine. Mm-hmm. But I need to have it there.
Yeah, there's something that I've learned, and it's a life lesson, but definitely about writing is like always have a plan, and also nothing ever goes according to the plan.
But again, and
always still have a plan. Like you still.
There's some people who have a plan, like if they have a plan when they're writing, to them it makes writing boring and not fun. Some people love the unpredictability of just writing and discovering a story. And that's the point of the first draft anyway, to discover the story. Because as much as I plot, I will write a first draft and then the final draft will not look much like what I wrote the first draft. So it's just about knowing your writing style. But for me, because it's so many words for me, I need to know how to navigate that. So I need my outline.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. I was always curious. I get, for me it varies, but I get very resistant to outline. But I'm realizing now that there was a story I was trying to write for a while, and I've gone to this stage. I was like, stop, you got to outline it because otherwise.
And also helps with time too. Yes.
Yeah.
If you pass, you can discover the story, but then when it comes to the revision and editing, it tends to need a lot more editing because you were just writing on the fly. Mm-hmm. But if you have a deadline and, you having an outline really helps with making sure that you use less time during revisions because you normally have a clear plan. So the story tends to need less editing.
Less like big editing, I guess.
Yes, big editing. Yeah.
All right, that's great. Last two questions. One, what's been your proudest moments along your journey? Yeah, any doesn't matter if it's the films, if it's the books. What's
proudest moments? Well, I guess I could just tell you the moments that came to my head.
Yeah.
I think with the short stories, it will be getting my first story published by Arts, etc. And getting paid for it. I actually still have the check uncashed, because it was the first money I ever made from my writing.
Well done to you. I would have cashed that.
I thought back then, I thought that they would take the check. I didn't realize that I had the option to keep the check and cash the money.
Oh, so you cashed the money and kept the check.
No, I didn't know that I could do that. I assumed that if I cashed it, they would take the check. Right? I didn't realize that they could just do a copy or like tear off a piece of it or something. So I still have that check. And so I remember that getting shortlisted for Commonwealth was up there, the Commonwealth Short Story Competition, simply because I had entered it so many times. So when I finally got shortlisted for the competition, that was something special. With the movies, I spoke a bit about the first movie, Payday, and the reception that I got. But one proud moment is when I was outside the box office. The movie was going on and everybody was watching the movie. But as producer, I was outside with tickets for people who had not shown up yet. So I was just waiting by the box office with VIP people on the list and greeting them as they came into the cinema. And I remember the box office attendant, he stuck a sold out sign, payday sold out on the window. And I was like, for real? Because at that time the cinema was holding like 200 and something people. And I was like, for real? All the tickets sold out? And he was like, yeah. And then I saw people coming, and just like how I would go to watch a movie and get there late or get there like with maybe about 10 minutes to spare and see it sold out and be vexed, like cheese on, I should have get here earlier. I saw somebody walking, and when they saw the payday sold out, they were like, she's on. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's doing that for a film that I wrote, So that was yes, having the standing ovation and hearing the people laugh in the crowd. Ooh, another good moment was seeing an old lady. She had a cane and she came to watch the movie. And I remember thinking, wow, she's coming to watch this movie because it's a Bajan movie. And she had not seen a Bajan movie before as a Barbadian, right? Yeah. In the cinema. So like seeing her hobble into the cinema was something very special to me, because obviously I didn't write with her age group in mind, but when you write a universal type of story, it appeals to a lot of people.
As you said, I think for some people is just like, for me, I tell people there are things that I have a friend who writes a certain type of thing. I was like, I wouldn't normally read it, but I read it because it's her.
Yes, exactly.
I think
so. It was. Yeah, it was extra special to know that she came out, because I think that was one that I can't remember where it was, honestly, which country. But I was like, she left her house to come and watch this movie, and I remember she liked it because I went to ask her, she enjoyed it. And with the books, I think holding the book for the first time, both my Fishy Stepmom and Josephine Against the Sea, that was something special because, again, I never thought I would write a book.
You're a short story writer.
Yeah, exactly. I'm writing books now, but I'm still a short story writer at heart, So that was nice. That was a proud moment for me. Those immediately came to mind. But there were several. But when you asked the question, those moments came to mind.
Oh, those are brilliant.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so last but not least, what are you reading now?
I'm reading a shelf of books. I'm in my writing room. So I have the books that I'm reading. I have a bookshelf in my bedroom for books that I am currently reading. Okay. Because my husband got fed up with all the books being at the side of the bed, and he was like, no, look, just get a bookshelf in there. So what I'm currently reading? I'm currently reading Nightmare King, a book by Dacre Herman. She's African-American author, middle grade. And she wrote this book called Hide and Seeker, which I really loved and I was really inspired by. So this is her book that just came out last month. I'm reading No God, No Monsters. That is still on my bookshelf. I'll be reading it for a little while, enjoying it piece by piece by Caldwell Turnbull.
Turnbull, he wrote a book in our book club. Wow.
Maybe it's No Gods, No Monsters.
Not No Gods, No Monsters.
I'm reading P. Jelly Clark's new book, Abina's Song. I just did a panel with him in Brooklyn. So nice. I want to read that. I also bought Roland Watson Grant's Sketcher, his book Sketcher. Kevin Gerard Hussein's Hungry Ghosts, and If I Survive You by Jonathan S. Free. Right. So I recently bought those and I have those to read. What else? And listen, I have a whole bookshelf of books waiting to be read. So yeah. And even just before I came onto the call with you, I was listening to a middle grade book by Stuart Gibbs. He writes a lot of like spy thriller adventure books for kids.
I'm familiar with Stuart Gibbs.
Yeah, and so I was reading his Spy School at Sea. So I was just listening to that just before I came to speak to you. Excellent. So, there are plenty. Look, I just opened my Libby and I have about 7 or 8 books that I have borrowed from the library, just waiting to read. Oh, look, The God of Good Looks is here. A book called She Started It, which is an adult thriller, which I'm hoping to write soon. Yeah, another book called The Protege. Yeah, and that's adult thriller. So, yeah, I read a lot.
That's fine. That's fine. I like a good book recommendation. So not questions really for me, but also for the listeners.
Yes.
So I'm going to let you go because we have kind of gone over the time, but it has been such an enjoyable conversation. I really appreciate you for joining me. And I look forward to the new books in the coming year. You said there's one coming
Year two. Yeah, one coming out next year.
Okay, look forward
to
it.
We will see. Thanks for the chat. Yeah, I'm sorry that it took so long.
Problem. Right on time.
It took so long.
Right on time.
Yes, I agree.
And thank you so much to my listeners. I'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us today. You can find out more about our guests in the show notes below. And don't forget to hit subscribe and share this episode with a friend. Until next time, I send you big love.